Serban is at the top of my list of mix engineers that I wish I could know more about their process. I wish I could sit them down for some sort of interview for a long time and just pick their brain, right? Serban is in the box only, and he started under Teddy Riley, who's a great producer who basically had this awesome SSL console there, and Serban became his go-to mixing guy, and basically Serban learned on an SSL. He then switched to mixing in the box, but what you have to note is that people that mix only in the box that are very successful, not all of them, but a lot of them have the console mindset. They have the same mindset that they would have had on a console. And this is a missing link for people who are trying to mix in the box when they don't get their mixes to be what they want it to be. And not only people who mix in the box. If you're hybrid, mixing both in the box and out of the box, there's critical elements here that you're going to have to understand. And this is one that some people may glance over, but just listen to this little clip, and then we're going to talk about it real quick. All right, this is from the George T. Music channel. He got this interview. He didn't do it. He got it from, I think, one of the Recording Academy channels, but he's basically grabbed it, and now I'm grabbing a grab. But the point is, just watch this, because I haven't found this guy's interview anywhere. So, you know, good job, George T. You're the man. So fair use for teaching purposes, fair use for teaching purposes. Check this out.
For me, I always start with, like, say, a channel strip type of thing, which I really like the Metric Halo one because I'm just used to it. And I think of everything that I do like it's a console. So I start off with that. So whenever I can't get what I want out of that, then I might add in another EQ. I think of it like you would on a console where you need something else, you throw an insert in there, right? So if your compressor's not giving you what you want, then you put something on the insert or put it in line before or after, you know what I mean? So to me, it's as simple as you can get it. And if you can't make something happen with that, then you only then add something else. And sometimes you find after you've done that, you'll be able to pull some things away. I kind of came up with the audiophile mentality. So less is always more. The less amount of stuff you put in the signal chain, the cleaner, the better.
That's the thing I want to just illustrate super clear. I give lessons, all right? I do it where I can screen share and see people's sessions. And a very common thing, it happened on 2 different lessons I was giving today. Maybe the instruments sound too soft, too muffled. Like, in other words, I'm not hearing the transients. I'm not hearing the peaks. I'm not hearing the attack of the instruments. I'm hearing like a glued, subtle version of that. And then I'll dive deeper to figure out why it is that I'm hearing this. And it's always a similar thing. We'll look at the channel strips, like what they have on each of their tracks, and always, almost beyond a shadow of a doubt, most of the time, I can almost guarantee there will be saturation plugins on there. There will be some sort of stuff that is supposed to add like an analog warmth or this and that, but it's basically softening everything. If you've ever taken a channel strip plugin that had like an emulation of a console and you gain it up and you really drive it, what you'll notice is things start to smush together, okay? And that could be good if used subtly, you know, but the point is it's softening things. So by adding stuff like that without needing to add it, you're going to be softening everything in your mix. And then you're going to wonder why it's soft, and then you're going to have to try to correct something, like to basically add other things to try to bring back what you took away, and you're fighting against the grain. You're basically sinking in quicksand trying to pull yourself out when you could just stand on solid ground by not adding that stuff to start with. The concept here that Serban is trying to make sure everyone hears, and it's a quick second and it goes over some people's heads. You really have to start by using things that are the most basic tools you can use and the simplest form of them. Not many different plugins. One plugin on each channel that's basic and very transparent, that is a channel strip, is a good one, because that allows you to quickly, without using your brain without using the processing power in here, to just literally dial in what you need to do to make what you're listening to sound good quickly. And if you don't get what you're listening to, like if it doesn't get where it needs to be, where you're saying, okay, it would be better if this, that's when you reach for something. But if you don't have the balance right between your instruments, how are you going to know that? You won't. If you don't have You know, like you shouldn't be listening in solo. You should be listening with everything together, and you should be using those basic EQ moves and basic compression that's relatively clean sounding on the channel strip. It shouldn't be super colored. Just like Serban's using the most basic tools. We're talking the metric halo EQ, which is probably one of the oldest like EQ strips there is, and then he's using an 1176 before it. Keep this in mind too, and that some people miss that. The compressor is first on Serban's chain. I will often, and you'll see my videos, I put like RVox first because that will bring the stuff to the front, right to the forefront. Then I'm dealing with some EQ and whatnot. But the point is, by having that first, it's super helpful to get everything to be more clear before I do anything. Then, and it's not like I'm slamming it, because a big part of how I explain how to make things sound good and clear is you need one version of what you're working with to be clean, relatively clean, not slammed. It needs to maintain transients. It needs to, the transient is the spike in the wave. That's what it is. So if you clamp down and chop heads off all your transients, and you could do this with saturation, you could do it with compression. These are all things that are ruining your mix. As soon as you chop the heads off stuff, you can't then send that to another parallel channel with more processing, because what you're sending is a chopped head, saturated version of the original track. You don't want to do that. You want to send a clean original track to any parallel buses that are parallel compressing or whatever. You want to send the thing with all the transients. You don't want to send the thing with the head chopped off to the stuff that you're then going to smush. You know, the stuff, it's going to be more smushed. You're doubling up on your smush. You're doubling up on how soft it is. You're doubling up on this saturation by doing that, because the compression's going to add it's basically a thicker smushed version that you can make louder, and you're going to take a saturated sound and send it there and then make it louder. That's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to have something clean with transients maintained, with peaks maintained. That is what gets sent to the parallel stuff. And you could have a version that's saturated, but that should be on its own channel. You keep the clean stuff, you make a saturated channel, you blend in as much as you want of the saturation, but it allows the clean to exist separate and apart from the channel that's saturated. This is the most critical thing to understand, because that's how he's working. In other words, if he's got to add something else, he has to decide first if he's getting what he wants out of what he's out of his basics thing, his 1176 and his EQ and some de-essing. If he's not getting the sound he wants out of that, he'll blend something else in. He could add another channel insert, because this is how you would work if you're on a console. If you're on a console, picture an old studio. There could be 3, 4 1176s in the background that you're going to insert on channels. You don't have 24 of them. You don't have one on every channel. You've got a few. So the concept is you only use them if you need them. You first have to see if you can make it work clean without them, because by doing this, that's where he says less is more. That's what he means. He means he's not out the gate deciding I'm going to add saturation because I want analog warmth. He's only doing it if it needs it. He's not saying out the gate, I'm going to add 2 additional compressors to this to make the vocals super in your face, because he doesn't even know if he needs it yet. He's first going to try to make it work with what's there. And this guy has all sorts of other techniques that he uses. Like, for example, I talk about clip gain a lot, and that's a huge way to make your compressor work less. In other words, you're sending your stuff to a compressor. If the compressor is working too hard because there's too much variance in how loud something is and how quiet it is, at the quiet parts, it's barely working. At the loud parts, it's slamming, right? That's what a compressor would do if the stuff is very varied on that track. So to avoid that, Serban does something, rather than clip gain, he might clip gain also, but if something's super loud, he'll just put it on a new track, and that way, when he sets his compressor on that one, it's for the stuff that's loud, and the compressor on the other track is for the stuff that's the rest of it, which is probably more quiet. So the compressor could be set 2 different ways. He's not automating the compressor, and he's also not trying to set it once and make it work for everything. That's what you'll run into. If you don't clip gain stuff, that's what you'll run into. And to try to clip gain to make it where it's perfect on everything is sometimes not possible. That's why you do stuff like this. Because I've gone through and clip gained word by word, some like phrase by phrase, sentence by sentence to try to make the compressor work a certain amount. Sometimes that's okay, but sometimes it's easier to just new track, instantiate another compressor, the same one if you want, so the sound is the same, but you'll just mess with the input level so that's the right input level so that it works the amount you want on the gain reduction. See, this is the trick. The trick is the more control you have, the more you can make it do what you want it to do. Then it becomes listen enough, mix enough things where you will start to understand what you want it to do. In other words, you need first to have the thought of, if your ears can't pick up, listen, the instruments are too smushed together. Like, if you can't pick that up and understand it, then you won't know that that's what you should fix. So you have to be listening enough. Just do enough mixes, and then this will start to come to you. There's no way to put this on easy mode. There's no settings to make you better. The trick is to understand the concepts. If things are too soft, you're probably saturating too much. If you don't hear enough clarity on the vocals, it's probably because you chop the heads off all the peaks and transients on everything, and now nothing gets heard clearly. All the syllables that should be popping out and making it so you can hear the word are flattened now because you didn't understand the concept of how to move stuff around. This is very, very common. So I don't want you to think you're alone if you're working in this way. And even if you don't understand exactly what I'm saying, that's okay. The fact that you're listening and you're trying means you're getting there. The point is, the less you put on, the better, because you wouldn't have to like undo adding a ton of saturation plugins if you didn't look at it that way to start with. In other words, the way you look at it is, how do I make this sound good using stuff that's not going to be destructive, okay? Because as soon as you start, and when I say destructive, saturation is going to chop stuff down. Like I said, it's going to flatten it, it's going to soften it, all right? And you may not want that. And later, if you're listening to your stuff, look to take stuff like that off if you've added it. And add it in a different way. Like I explained before, if you have it on its own fader and it's like a parallel channel, in other words, your clean track exists and that's being sent to your mix bus. So the clean track is getting to your mix bus clean with all the peaks. In other words, the stuff that's quiet is not compressed, so it's quiet, but the loud stuff gets to the mix bus because it's the peak on the waveform. Then you're taking that track with EQ, DS, and maybe a little slight bit of compression, if any, and you're taking that to a parallel channel that's smushed and blending to taste. And it could be smushed with a compressor. Another parallel channel could be smushed with a saturator. But this way, if you want more saturation, you just add a little bit of that fader. Just a little bit of the saturation fader. If you want a little bit of compression, you add a little bit more of the compressed fader, and that will bring up the stuff that's quiet in your mix on that track. See what I'm saying? There's so much to this, but by working in this way, you can get way, way better results. Also, think about it like this. A compressor works by letting signal through, right? Let's say you send 7 things to a compressor. The loudest thing is going to be ducking everything else naturally, sort of like a side chain, but that's just how compression works. Like if you have think of an analog compressor, you send 6 different instruments to it and one of them is a vocal. If you crank the vocal 20 dB, now that vocal is the loudest thing that you're hearing, and it's causing everything else, since it all can't live in that compressor at the same volume now, because one's so much louder than the other. Everything else is way, way below that volume-wise. So this is how you should be thinking about it in order to let your track breathe. You're sending a bunch of things to a parallel channel, generally not bass, not kick, not things that are going to eat it all up, okay? Just mid-range instruments and vocals, let's say. And then what you're really doing is, by creating some sort of vocal volume automation on the vocal, when the vocal gets louder, it's now going to send more vocal into that parallel channel, which will naturally duck the instruments. So it's not side chained, it's just a compressor, but by using it in parallel in this way, you're basically getting side chain compression for free. You're getting volume automation for free in a way that's more natural than if you were to, for example, add a sidechain compressor on 6 different instruments that's all being, key input with the vocal. You see what I'm saying? It's the same thing, but it's better this way because it's less plugins, so it's working differently. It's it's also working together, all of it, rather than each of them working separately and being ducked a little bit. Think of saturation the same way. If you're trying to saturate some stuff, consider that parallel channel of saturation and send multiple things to that channel. That way you're saturating on one channel some stuff, a bunch of it, right? But it's not 8 different instantiations of a saturation plugin, which is going to soften everything and just make it just like too gluey. And that too gluiness translates to nothing is punching. Nothing is sticking out. It all just sounds like a mush blob. You understand? Nothing Serban does sounds like a mush blob. It's all clear. There's depth. It's relatively transparent. And let me say this. There's a comment on here that's like so frustrating. Let me just show you this. Ready? Look at this. The top comment on this video, this on George T Music. Check this out. People also got to understand he's being sent really well recorded and produced records by the top artists in the world. Okay? Let me just tell you this. That's a cop-out. And, like, obviously the stuff is good, but do you think he started at the level where the first things how do you think he got to where he is? You think the first things he mixed sounded better than anything? Because that's not the way it works. He wasn't given the best stuff ever, and then people said, wow, man, you do such a great job with the best stuff ever. He probably had a lot of things along the way that weren't that good that allowed him to hone his skills. You got to stop thinking that because he's great, it's because of what he's being sent. It's absolutely ridiculous. Chad Blake, watch the video I did with Chad Blake talking about, you know, the stuff he mixed that sounded like really just awful, noise all over the place, recorded on a freaking tape cassette 4-track that was broken. And you lean into the problems. You lean into them. If things sound too dirty and messed up, make it more dirty. If go with that. That is now your sound. And if the person you're working with wants it to be a crystal clear, pristine recording, and you had to make it dirty because it started so dirty already, there was no chance you're going to be able to clean it up, well, then you got to do what you got to do, and you explain that to them. And if they don't like it and they want it clean, then you don't need to work with them anyway. Trust me when I tell you, sometimes when people tell you they don't want to work with you, it's actually a blessing. It's a blessing. And you know why? Because you won't always make everybody happy. There's some people you can't make happy. There's some people who hear things totally different than you hear them, and it could be great and they still hate it. They could like their version better. That's nowhere near as good. That is just what happens in this business. So you can't make everybody happy. Don't even try. All you could do is make it sound as great as you can possibly do to you. That's all you can do. And that's what you anchor your flag in the ground attached to. You anchor it to, it's as good as I can make it. This is the best I can do with this. And that is what creativity is. When you have to go dirty because it's already dirty and there ain't no shot at cleaning it off, then that's what you do. And then you may get somewhere amazing. All right. But you don't worry about if they like it or not. You just do what you have to do based on what you're given. That's why a comment like this about you got to understand he's being sent great stuff. Honestly, he didn't get great by being sent great stuff. He got great by being sent crap like everybody else got great who was sent crap. Nobody starts with great polished stuff that's amazing. If you're lucky enough and you do enough work and you learn enough by working on stuff that doesn't sound good, you may get lucky enough to be in a position to be getting stuff sent to you that sounds really, really good. And in that case, you would use less and less stuff to make it great because it's already coming to you packed full of amazing sounds, amazing vibe, recorded really well, produced really well, arranged really well, because that's the big thing right there, arrangement. A big reason why your mix that you're working on may not be sounding great is because the person who made the beat track decided to use 6 different bass instruments to create a kick sound or a bass sound, and there's one instrument for doing, for everything else in the mid-range, and there's 6 different things with 6 different low-end instruments, all in the same frequency range, trying to, now you got to balance that. You got a better time trying to cook, beef stroganoff using chicken or something. I mean, there's not possible. Okay. So my point is, you got to have to be creative in some ways. And by working on stuff that's not as amazing as it as can possibly be, okay, that's how you get there. That's how you get there. So don't ever think, I don't want to hear anyone who listens to my channel saying stuff like that ever on a comment. I don't want you to hit like on anything like that, because all it is giving yourself an excuse for why somebody else is great and you're not. It's why you're comparing yourself to them and saying, well, if I had what they had, I'd be great. Well, that never helped anybody. It's not going to help you. It's literally not going to help. It didn't help Serban either, because like I told you, he wasn't sent amazing, amazing, amazing stuff his whole career. I can guarantee you that. He was sent stuff, that was recorded in his studio by Teddy Riley that was recorded really well. But I know through his days, he has encountered stuff that wasn't, and he was able to take it where it needed to be because of everything he learned. And that comes from what you want to do to it based on what's possible, based on what you're given. So that's why I say, you need to do enough stuff just so that you start to understand what is wrong and what needs to be done to make it right. You'll start to understand it naturally. You'll say, wow, this would be great if there weren't 6 things playing kick drum all at the same time. Oh, it'd be fantastic. I might as well remove 4 of them. You understand? If you start looking at it like that, we're like, okay, this would be great if the instruments weren't so tame. Let me see what's going on to soften them, and what can I take off? You understand? And that's how he looks at everything. And he looks at it from the point of view of, first, do no harm. First, what can I do to this to make it as good as possible? Then, if it's not there yet with the stock compressor that's super clean, on his, that he's using all the time, I call it stock, whatever he always has in his template, if he can't get it going with the most basic thing going that he's got, then he looks at what can I insert in, just like he would look at it if he was on a console. But he's not looking at it first thinking, all right, this should have some analog warmth and this should have some saturation and we should do. He's not looking at it that way. He's trying to make it work with as little as possible. All right? Do me a favor. Throw as much as possible in the comments section if you got some value out of this. There's so much that people can learn just from this concept of they can do well with what they're given if they're creative enough. And they can also do well with the tools they have. They don't need the latest and greatest. Just like Serban, you can use basic stuff and get better results if you're thinking this way. First, what is the least amount of things I can do to make this great? That will save you so much time, especially when you have to go back later and take things off, and you have to always chase your tail when you're mixing, because the less you have to go back and take stuff off, the less you have to chase your tail. All right, because you're building it to the way it's supposed to sound from the beginning, and you're not going backwards. That's how you actually start to mix in a forward fashion that's actually helping the song. All right, so throw anything you got from this and anything you do in the comments. It really helps me out. I really appreciate it. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. My name's Evan Jaffe. This is Custom Cut Studios. You guys got this.